withdrawn. Now, you would agree, and I think we had some brief discussions before you came in here and testified.
That's correct.
Right? Not very lengthy ones. No more than a half hour.
I think it was longer than that, but
Close.
hour and a half.
An hour and a half total?
Yeah.
All right. And you would agree, would you not, that if blood gets onto a portion of the sole of a shoe, that it would leave an imprint without a border?
And I testified to that yesterday.
Yes.
Yes.
And it would leave a partial imprint with non-printing area around it.
That's correct.
Now, did you not testify on direct examination that the only possible way that this could have happened with respect to the parallel line imprint on the envelope is if the imprint occurred at the very onset of the crime? Were those your words?
I was trying to make a case for that happening, and it would be likely that if that kind of occurrence did in fact happen, it would be before the whole walkway was covered with blood.
Well, did you not say the only possible way that could happen is if it was at the very outset of the crime, the first drops of blood that was spilled, where one of those drops may have fallen to the ground, whatever contact that blood at that point had was limited in size because there is only one drop in that area and then it's transferred to the paper?
That sounds like what I said, yes.
And you were asked questions by Ms. Clark that the basis for your opinion...
Your Honor, could I see what counsel's reading from?
That's the transcript from yesterday, counsel.
Which I don't have.
You got real time. Proceed.
Now, and you gave this opinion after a discussion of the volumes of photographs that you had looked at the crime scene, right?
And the examination of the actual envelope itself, yes.
Okay. Now,
Mr. Scheck.
this is 1346.
Thank you.
Did you review Dr. Lee's testimony with respect to this board?
Can I come down?
Please do.
I don't believe I saw this particular board, no.
And you didn't review his testimony with respect to this board?
Mr. Scheck, do we have any remains on this?
No.
All right.
I'm sorry.
And you didn't review his testimony with respect to this?
I don't recall him talking about this, these blood marks on the envelope, no.
All right. Now, you said that the parallel line imprint could have been made without a border and without a non-printing area around it if that came from some blood drops that were shed at the onset of the struggles.
That's one possibility, yes.
But you were dubious about that because there was a whole pool of blood that you saw at the crime scene.
That's one of the reasons that I don't think it's a shoe print.
Now, do you recall Dr. Lee's testimony that the parallel line imprint, because of the bloodstain patterns, had to be left first, and there were other blood imprints over it later, thereby indicating that there could be you could time the deposits by way of an interpretation of the bloodstains?
I don't recall that testimony.
You don't.
No. I
And
don't recall this board. I
you
must
don't?
have missed that part.
You must have missed
Yes.
it. And, well, do you think that before you come in and testify about when you think bloodstains were deposited, it would have been useful to study Dr. Lee's testimony with respect to the bloodstain evidence?
Well, objection, it's argumentative, FBI still.
Sustained, it's argumentative.
Do you think that bloodstain analysis in terms of spatter and the times of deposit has some significance in terms of figuring out when imprints were made?
Are you referring to shoe imprints, sir?
Well, I'm referring to bloodstains generally.
Well, I'm not here to testify about bloodstains, but shoe prints.
Well, I understand, but these are imprints made in blood, aren't they, that we're talking about?
Are we talking about shoe prints or fabric impressions or other markings in blood?
Isn't the discussion here about imprints?
One of the reasons that I'm here is to dispel this mysterious word imprint as including anything that you want it to be, and refer specifically to shoe prints, which is what I examined.
But as a scientific fact, an imprint is an imprint.
No, it's not a scientific fact that an imprint is an imprint. It can be an imprint of a number of objects we've talked about, and if you would be
I'd be very
referring
specific for you.
specific to the
Sure.
shoe.
Objection, the counsel's interrupting the
Yes.
witness.
Let him finish his answer.
Can the witness please finish his answer?
Had you finished, sir?
I just would like to talk specifically about shoe prints, or know in your questions if you're asking me about shoe prints or fabric impressions, or specifically what you're asking about.
Well, don't you believe that it is important to consider all the evidence in reaching an interpretation of an imprint found at a crime scene?
In general, yes.
And wasn't one of the reasons that you were ruling out the parallel line imprints as could have possibly coming from a shoe was the lack of a border and the non-printing area around it?
That is one of several reasons why, yes.
Well,
Just
two, actually,
Two,
right?
two of several reasons.
And before you came and testified, yesterday you gave us a board that you didn't use listing your reasons for eliminating the parallel line imprint patterns as being possibly coming from a shoe. You recall that?
I didn't prepare those boards, and when I reviewed them upon arriving in Los Angeles, I did not think they could explain it as well as I could just talking, so I chose not to use them.
Right. But in those boards, there were 4 different reasons that you stated.
I believe there were 4 boards.
Objection, irrelevant,
Overruled.
Now, if there were evidence based on bloodstain interpretation that the parallel line imprint on the envelope happened before the other bloodstains on the envelope, would you not agree that that was scientific facts to support the position that that imprint was left before a greater amount of bloodshed occurred at the scene?
I totally concur that that imprint was left at that point, but by fabric or another object, not a shoe.
Move to strike not responsive.
Overruled.
My question, sir, is that if through the, you understand that Dr. Lee, Dr. Lee testified that the parallel line imprint pattern was then covered over with a greater amount of blood from another imprinting source.
Yes, I've examined the envelope. I'm aware of what you're talking about.
All right? And that, would you concur, looking at the middle photograph labeled bloodstain pattern number 2, that in the upper right-hand corner of that is the parallel line imprint that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think there's a much better photograph
Yes,
to discuss
I understand.
it. This is very hard to discuss it on because you can't see the parallel lines very well, and it's way out of scale. But yes, I know what you're talking about.
Well, there are other photographs of this,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, there are.
And this particular board, do you know, was the one where the discussion of when things were deposited occurred in Dr. Lee's testimony?
I'm previously stated, I did not
Right.
see that portion.
Didn't follow this.
But I know what you're talking about
All right.
with regard to the imprint or the small mark, which he referred to as an imprint, with the wavy lines.
Okay, now, would you not agree that this depiction of the order of deposits of blood supports the position that the parallel line imprint on the envelope occurred earlier in the struggle rather than later when there was more bloodshed?
Are you asking that in the context of how it would influence my determination regarding whether or not that was a shoe print?
I'm asking you just to concede that that is a fact that relates to when that imprint was made, when the blood deposits occurred.
In my testimony yesterday, I conceded there was hypothetical ways which could have in fact occurred, that that small print could have been put on there in a way, and I gave one example, the onset of the crime, with before the other blood, or, you know, and that would be the reason that it would be a small isolated print, which I think is what you're asking, if I could continue. That in no way influences my whole interpretation of it as to whether or not it's a shoe print.
Well, wait. Please, if you can, I'll try to make my questions as clear as possible, and maybe you could.
Objection, Your Honor, we get it, Tori, Michael.
Overruled.
Now, all I'm asking you is that you said yesterday you were answering in response to hypotheticals, right?
I gave a hypothetical of how that impression could occur without surrounding features in an island configuration
Right.
at that size.
Right.
Yes.
And what you were saying is, if it occurred earlier in the struggle where there were just a few blood drops that might have gotten on the sole of a shoe, you would get an imprint without non-printing area around it and without a border, right?
I never mentioned anything about blood drops on a shoe in this case, but in the hypothetical
Yes.
context, it said it could be a drop of blood on any object, hypothetically including a shoe, and that is how you could get the isolated island impression.
Right. And that was on direct. You offered that, right?
Not as a shoe in this case, but as a hypothetical
Right.
event, yes.
Yes. And you said that would be the only possible way it could happen, right?
That was one way in which it could happen.
Well, but you were unaware of this board and testimony that Dr. Lee gave supporting his contention that that imprint
Objection has been answered. It was
Overruled.
occurred
argumentative, Your Honor.
earlier
Overruled.
in the struggle before subsequent deposits of blood were on the envelope.
Has been answered.
Overruled.
The sequence of the events with regard to the blood deposition on the envelope has no influence on my interpretation of those parallel lines. Whether they came before or after would have no bearing on my overall interpretation and opinion that that is not a shoe print.
Would it have bearing on at least two of the factors that you raised, the lack of a border and the lack of non-printing area around it?
No, because if we had a picture of the entire envelope here, which I'd like to use to explain if I could in my answer. Do we have one of the entire envelope? Because this doesn't show what I'd like to point to in my answer.
What kind of picture would you like?
A picture of the entire envelope in any size.
All right, this is 1349.
Yes, Your Honor. Okay, if I can answer your question. If you look at the envelope, there are many areas around this parallel pattern which don't have a continuation of that pattern. Some of them are obstructed by additional blood, and you are stating that that came afterwards, and that wouldn't have any bearing on my exam. There are other areas which still do not contain blood, which still are isolated, and for instance over here there's no continuation of that pattern, but there's no border like you might get on a shoe. So on this side, there's very little blood, almost no blood right here on the corner of the envelope, yet there's no continuation of the pattern. Over here, of course, it's obstructed by other blood stains. This in no way, what you're stating to Dr. Lee's testimony, has any influence, in my opinion, regarding whether this is a shoe print or not.
Well, I really don't want to be repetitive about this, but are you conceding that from the deposition of the blood, that the other blood that you say was obstructing the pattern came after?
I'm not rendering an opinion whether it came before or after. I'm stating that with regard to the examination of these parallel lines and their features, which are dissimilar, and in the entire looking at this examination, dissimilar to a footwear impression, have no bearing on my opinion.
Well, so in other words, even if, as you said on direct examination yesterday, this imprint was made at the onset of the struggle, and it came from an early blood drop, and thereby accounted for the fact that there's no border and no impression, nothing in the non-printing area around it, that wouldn't affect your opinion.
Objection asked and answered.
What I'm examining is the characteristics of this imprint or impression, whatever made it. I'll use a general term, impression, whether it's fabric or shoes or whatever. I'm saying that my examination of that is totally independent of the other blood around it, which obviously is not related to it, and has no bearing whether that other blood came before or after on my opinion with regard to this impression.
So you're looking at one factor and not considering the rest.
When you look at a shoe impression, you don't consider anything else. You're looking at the shoe impressions.
Okay. Now, I think even in your own report, you indicate that you observe creases and folds in this area of the envelope.
Well, there's obviously normal, that this envelope has been creased and folded or crumpled in many places.
But I'm referring particularly to the area of the parallel line imprint. It was an area that was creased and folded.
Yeah, right here, along here, here. This mark along here was actually a result of the eyeglass curvature inside the envelope. There's just a number of those features that you're describing along the envelope, yes.
And the envelope was not on a flat surface, was it?
I don't know if when this mark was made it was or not, but it has no influence on the examination of these characteristics.
Well, do you know if the receiving surface that the envelope was on was flat?
The receiving surface could have been as varied as a drop of blood on the envelope and Ron Goldman's jeans making contact and making that print. It could be a drop on his jeans and him with the envelope in his hand coming down and responding to that and putting this mark on it. There's no way to look at this and tell how that happened. That is why you rely on your examination of the physical features here, and you're not influenced by other factors that you don't know for certain what occurred. I'm looking at the physical characteristics of this impression or imprint. Based on those features, in my opinion, for the reasons I stated yesterday, it is not a shoe print.
Mr. Bodziak, did you hear Agent Diedrich testify?
Yes, I did.
Did you hear Agent Diedrich say that he thought it was unlikely that the imprint there could have been made by the envelope coming into contact with Ron Goldman's jeans in the fashion that you just described and then falling to the ground?
I believe he stated there had to be some pressure involved of some sort. It couldn't fall through the air and just touch his jeans and fall off, but it could, with pressure, make contact with his jeans.
Are you don't recall Agent Diedrich saying that he thought the most likely and reasonable interpretation of how that imprint occurred is that the envelope was flat on the ground and something or some object imprinted on it?
Sustained.
You recall his testimony about that?
May I answer that?
Yes.
I recall his testimony that you had to be pressure, and common sense would dictate that the envelope being on the ground would be a more likely scenario than what I described with grabbing your leg where there might be a drop of blood.
He did say that, didn't he?
Did say what?
He did say that it was his opinion that both the envelope and the piece of paper being on the ground was the most likely and reasonable way that the envelope and the paper would be when the imprint was made. Didn't he say that?
That mistakes the testimony.
I think his most definitive explanation was that you had to have pressure between the envelope and the blood. It could not just be something that bounced off of it or grazed it. There had to be pressure. I don't think he rendered an opinion as to exactly what happened.
You sure?
I know he did.
You're sure he didn't say that the most
Counsel,
reasonable
we're-
and likely way
Counsel, we're
is
arguing
it on the
now.
ground?
Counsel, we're arguing now.
Okay.
The jury heard the testimony.
And we have transcripts that we can
The
get.
jury heard the testimony.
Now, in terms of, as a general proposition, when a shoe makes contact with the surface that is not flat or uneven surfaces, it can leave an imprint made in blood of part of the shoe and not the borders, for example, that wouldn't come in contact with it.
Could you give a specific example of what you're stating?
Well,
I believe I know what you are, but could you define?
Well, uneven surfaces will cause contact with only parts of a shoe.
Such as if you stepped on a golf ball.
Well, you stepped on a curved tile.
On a curved tile,
Curved tile,
on the very edge of it,
yes.
yeah, that's possible.
This envelope was found near the edge of a curved tile, right?
That's where it was photographed. I don't know where it was when the impression was put on it.
In fact, when you made your notes, you were investigating the possibility that this envelope had been turned over, there was blood on the corner of the envelope, and that somebody or something stepped on it, and the imprint came from what you call troweling marks on the edge of the tile.
Not exactly.
Well,
May I explain?
sure.
Okay, in my notes, when I examined this envelope, the first time I examined it at the Los Angeles Police Department lab, I observed these marks, and I was interested what could have accounted for them, and so I made some notes. And the time I had to examine this and photograph it was limited. I made some notes, possibly troweling marks on the concrete, because I had some photographs which showed blood-marked areas of the tile and various striations, again, from these finishing marks that whoever finished the concrete put on there. So I noted possible trowel marks. I also noted that in looking at Ron Goldman's Pataga boots, that there was a certain cleat formation designed to those boots. And I was looking at some of the different shapes of the blood deposited here, and I was trying in my mind to see if those boots may have either directly or with the envelope turned over on a blood-soaked walkway and then stepping on the back of it and then flipped over again, have caused, or if I could associate those boots with any of these marks. Upon final examination of the photographs, the Pataga boots, and all of the other things I had, I was never able to fully explain this and subsequently referred it to Douglas Diedrich because it was not a shoe impression with parallel lines. And with regard to these, I was never able to associate it definitely with Ron Goldman's Pataga boots or any other item of footwear.
All right, so you were investigating, at first in your reports, you indicated more than one shoe impressions on this envelope.
Possibly what I had just described from Ron Goldman's Pataga boots.
And would that scenario not include the fact that you thought that the envelope might have been on the edge of a tile, and that's how you got the trawling marks?
At that point, when I made those notes, I wasn't eliminating anything. I was making exactly what notes are, notes, to refer to later and to follow up with additional examination, which I did, to which I've testified.
So the answer to my question is yes.
Could you restate your question so I'm sure what it
That
is?
is part of your scenario, that possibility you were pursuing, that you thought that the envelope might have been on the curved edge of the tile.
Now, I made no reference of a curved edge of a tile, simply the troweling mark.
Trolley mark, which could have been on the curved edge of the
They could
tile.
have been anywhere on the tile.
Now, with respect to the piece of paper, you have indicated that you saw the parallel line imprint impressions on that piece of paper.
You're referring now to the triangular piece of paper?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, and that piece of paper was not recovered for examination.
No, I never saw the original piece of paper.
And maybe if we could bring that up here just for a second. Now, did you recall parts of Dr. Lee's testimony with respect to the bloodstain patterns and the orders of deposit on this piece of paper?
My memory just recollects that he was referring to wavy lines that he referred to as imprints, and that he could not state definitively that they were made by shoes.
And so you did not,
Excuse me, I'm sorry, counsel. You're referring to a new exhibit for the record, please?
I'm sorry, this is 1338A.
Thank you.
And
Excuse
you
me,
did
counsel.
not,
Are you close?
close to what?
You know what?
Finishing? No, I'm sorry.
All right, finish this line of questioning.
Sure. And in terms of, so you did not focus on his testimony as to the order of deposit of blood on the piece of paper?
No.
All right. And would it make a difference to you that Dr. Lee indicated, from the best that could be said, looking at the photograph, that it appeared that the parallel line imprints were first, and there was other blood covering them based on the blood stain pattern?
Again, as for reasons I stated before, if he said that, it would have no influence on my interpretation of the portions of the wavy lines that you could see that was the imprint.
But it would go towards at least two of the reasons that you gave us, the absence of a border and the absence of non-printing area around the imprint. It would be relevant to that, wouldn't it?
Well, the detail in this particular impression is a lot less than the detail of the envelope at which we had the original item. And the area that it covers and the adjacent areas don't have a border, but as far as it being an island, I don't think you could definitively rule where it began or ended on this photograph.
Well, I simply was asking you whether or not the order of deposit has some relevance in terms of at least two factors, the border and the absence of a non-printing area. Does it have relevance to that?
The only relevance, the answer is no, because the only relevance is what remains there. What remains there is what an examiner can examine, not what they want to hypothesize or say was there and is no longer there.
Well, is the blood stain pattern visible on that envelope?
Probably two-thirds of, you mean the triangular piece of paper?
Yes, on this, I'm sorry. On this triangular piece of paper, do you see blood stain patterns?
Well, there's a lot of blood on it. Whether or not that blood was wicked up because it was lying in blood, or whether blood fell on it and was wicked or absorbed into it, or whether it's a result of contact with an object at all of these other points, or if it's actually blood spatter flying through the air and striking it. That's not my area of expertise. I'm comparing the footwear impression.
Mm-hmm. Well, I understand that what you're basically telling us is that you feel you don't have an area of expertise in blood stain interpretation.
With regard to shoe
Objection's
imprints,
irrelevant.
Overruled.
with regard to shoe imprints, I have a very good base of experience and expertise in that area.
But you're saying that you'll look at the imprint, but as far as the rest of the stains are concerned, that's not your area.
You cannot reconstruct, well, let me say this. All of these stains, which are not part of the wavy lines, have no bearing on my examination.
Just one more question then. Do you recall Dr. Lee offering any testimony about the effect of the blood surrounding this parallel line pattern and it's obscuring borders.
Yes, and I can see that. I can see where there are wavy lines that blood has either before or after come over it and partially obscured it.
So you would agree then with Dr. Lee that because of the subsequent deposit that obscures some of the area with the wavy lines, that could obscure some pattern of a border.
It definitely does obscure part of the impression, yes.
Okay.
There's other areas where there is no blood stains, which the wavy lines run into.
All right. All right, Mr. Scheck, would you take this item down, please? All right, thank you, Mr. Harris. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our recess for the morning session. Please remember all my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves. Don't form any opinions about the case. Don't conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. Don't allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. I hope you have a enjoyable weekend this weekend. Also, I wanted to compliment you on your continuing level of attention. I can tell by the expression on your faces every day that you're all tired, almost as tired as I am. But I know you're hanging in there because I've noticed that when certain items have come up that obviously you're very attentive as to which item of evidence is which, and I've seen you react to things that indicate to me that you're clearly as much on top of this as some of the lawyers, and maybe more so than me. As far as the numbering of the exhibits, and I know you're paying attention. I know it's tough, but hang in there. We're almost there. All right? Have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Mr. Bodziak, unfortunately, Monday, 9 o'clock. All right. We're in recess.